because of starting the group and just because of them being musicians, because that was Dad's big love, was the music. And
something inside the Roy Rogers household never added up. And for 28 years after his death, the silence never broke. To the world, Roy Rogers was untouchable. He was the king of the Cowboys, the face of American goodness. He was a man built into a symbol, always smiling, always clean, always safe for every living room in the country. But inside the walls of that image, something was being buried so carefully that even the closest fans never saw it cracking. Now, decades later, his own daughter has stepped forward and finally spoken. And what she's describing doesn't just challenge the legend, it splits it in two. So, what did she confirm? And why does it change everything fans thought they knew? Join us as we unpack the truth. Roy Rogers' daughter finally confirmed. The cowboy who was never supposed to exist. Roy Rogers was not supposed to be Roy Rogers. The man the world fell in love with was born Leonard Franklin Sly on November 5, 1911, in Cincinnati, Ohio. His family was poor. His dad worked a factory job and hated it so much, he built a houseboat out of salvaged lumber and sailed the family up the Ohio River looking for something better. That is the kind of origin story that does not exactly scream Hollywood legend. But Leonard Sly had music in him, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get noticed. He moved to California at 18 with basically nothing. He bounced between musical groups, playing with outfits called the Hollywood Hillbillies, the Rocky Mountaineers, and eventually the Sons of the Pioneers, which became one of the most beloved Western musical acts in American history. The road to stardom was slow and genuinely hard. Studios turned him down. He was told he looked too young. He kept going anyway. And then Republic Pictures signed him in 1938 and handed him a brand new identity. The name Roy Rogers was not his idea. According to studio history, Republic gave him the name as a tribute to Will Rogers, the beloved Western personality who had recently died in a plane crash. The Roy part reportedly came from the French word for king, as in Roy Rogers, king of the Cowboys. He had zero input in the decision. The studio built a legend from scratch, and the man born Leonard Sly just had to grow into it. What Cheryl Rogers Barnett confirmed years down the road is that her dad never actually stopped being Leonard Sly on the inside. The regular kid from Ohio who grew up on a cheap houseboat stayed right there under the expensive wardrobe. But the Hollywood executives needed a money-making cowboy character, so he gave them exactly what they paid for every single day of his career. His family spent decades watching him carry the massive weight of pretending to be a fictional character just to keep the movie industry happy. It is funny how a man can spend his entire life pretending to be a flawless American hero just because a bunch of suits in California decided a houseboat kid was bad for merchandise sales. But what nobody outside the family knew was just how much that gap had cost him and how many secrets were buried underneath that legendary smile. The first wife nobody talked about. Most fans who grew up watching Roy Rogers and Dale Evans together assumed the king of the Cowboys and the queen of the West were always a pair. The wholesome, faithful, Christian couple who rode into every sunset together. That image was real in many ways, but it was also carefully constructed. And one of the things it quietly buried was the complicated history that came before Dale ever entered the picture. Roy Rogers was married before Dale. He was actually married twice before she ever entered the picture. His first marriage to Lucille Ascolese in 1933 collapsed after only 3 years and ended in divorce. The movie studio acted like it never happened. Then he married Grace Arlene Wilkins in 1936. Grace was the actual love of his early life. They adopted their daughter Cheryl, had a daughter named Linda Lou, and were trying to live a normal life. In 1946, Grace died from sudden complications right after giving birth to their son, Roy Jr. She never left that hospital room alive. Roy was left suddenly alone, with 3 young children, grieving, and already one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Cheryl later described growing up on the Republic Pictures studio lot because her father took her to work with him after Grace died. The wardrobe and makeup departments became her babysitters. She grew up surrounded by costume rails and film sets, while her father tried to hold everything together between takes. Dale Evans showed up in 1947, and the movie studios immediately turned the relationship into a legendary romance. Still, Cheryl confirmed that behind all the flashbulbs was a father dealing with a massive amount of grief that the public never got to see. Roy Rogers became rich by selling smiles and heroism to millions of children across the country. Away from the cameras, he was just a grieving widower trying to raise 3 toddlers by himself before Dale stepped in to fix the mess. That was the actual human being. He was not the perfect cartoon character printed on the movie posters. It is funny how Hollywood can sell a beautiful fantasy about a fearless cowboy, while the actual guy is at home, completely overwhelmed by real life. And the complicated truth about what Roy Rogers was really like at home was something Cheryl spent decades protecting before she finally decided the world was ready to know. The family tragedy Hollywood tried to hide. The Rogers family dealt with loss on a scale most people cannot imagine. And for a long time, they dealt with it quietly, because Roy Rogers was a brand, and brands were not supposed to suffer. The first loss was Grace. Then came the children. And what happened next is one of the most heartbreaking chapters in Hollywood history that almost nobody talks about today. In 1950, Dale Evans gave birth to a daughter named Robin Elizabeth. The doctors realized almost immediately that the baby had Down syndrome. Back then, the medical industry basically told parents to dump those kids in an asylum and pretend they never existed. Roy and Dale told the doctors no. They packed up the baby, brought her home, and told the rest of the kids that Robin was just a delicate little flower who needed extra love. During an era when people hid disabled children away out of shame, keeping that baby was a massive middle finger to the entire medical establishment. Robin died just before her 2nd birthday. She contracted mumps, which the other children had brought home from school, and her body could not fight it. Dale Evans turned her grief into a book called Angel Unaware, written from Robin's perspective, which went around the world and was credited with changing how people thought about Down syndrome. Teachers still use it today. But the public version of Robin's story was always filtered through faith and inspiration. Cheryl revealed that the private grief inside that house was something else entirely. The losses did not stop there. Their adopted daughter Debbie died in a bus accident at age 12. Their adopted son Sandy died in an accident while serving in the peacetime army in Germany. 3 children gone before their parents. Roy Rogers kept showing up on television every week, smiling, singing happy trails, telling kids to be good. He was living through losses that would have broken most people, and the cameras never once caught it. Cheryl confirmed that her father processed grief privately and deeply, and that very few people outside the family ever saw that side of him. The strength Roy Rogers showed publicly was real, but so was the pain he carried privately, and Cheryl finally talked about what that actually looked like behind closed doors. What Cheryl finally confirmed about her father. Cheryl Rogers Barnett grew up as the oldest Rogers child. She was adopted as a baby from Hope Cottage in Texas, and the story she always told about it was one of the sweetest in Rogers family lore. Roy apparently wiggled his finger in front of every baby in the nursery, and every single one cried or screamed. Cheryl reached up and grabbed his finger. He called home to California and told his wife he had found their baby. That story set the tone for how Cheryl always talked about her father. With warmth, with pride, and with real honesty. What she confirmed over the years, through her memoir, Cowboy Princess, through interviews, and through the documentaries she co-produced about her parents, was that Roy Rogers was genuinely the man people hoped he was. He did not drink. He did not chase other women. He did not blow money on Hollywood excess. He was faithful to his faith, faithful to Dale, and faithful to his kids. In an era when many of his Hollywood peers were quietly destroying themselves behind the scenes, Roy Rogers was at home being an actual father. But Cheryl also confirmed that the pressure to maintain that perfect image was relentless, and that her father felt it constantly. Photographers reportedly lived at their house, and Cheryl said almost everything the family did ended up in a movie magazine. There was no private family moment that was truly private. The public consumed the Rogers family as a product, and Roy Rogers had to make sure the product never slipped. What the fans never actually saw was a father who was completely running on fumes. He buried a wife and his own children, yet he still had to show up to the set and smile for the cameras because that was the business deal. Cheryl confirmed that her dad was just a regular guy dealing with a massive amount of pain that the corporate brand had to hide. He had real doubts, he had heavy grief, and he was tired of the act. He just made sure the people who bought his merchandise never saw him crack. That level of control was very real, and his family watched him pay the price for it every single day of his life. And it turns out, the secrets Cheryl had been sitting on for years went even deeper than anyone outside the family had suspected. The rumors that followed him to his grave. Roy Rogers died on July 6, 1998, at the age of 86, from congestive heart failure at his home in Apple Valley, California. Dale Evans followed him in February 2001. They were married for 51 years. The world mourned them as an institution. But within that mourning, certain questions and rumors that had circulated for decades suddenly got louder. Questions that the family had never directly addressed. Questions about what was real and what was performance. Rumors always followed Roy Rogers and Dale Evans, specifically that their marriage was just another Hollywood business arrangement. The movie studio actually hated the idea of them getting married at first. Executives told Roy that marrying his co-star would instantly kill their box office chemistry and ruin their careers. They ignored the suits, got married anyway, and stayed together for over 50 years, which is rare for any couple. Still, people deep inside the business kept whispering that the whole perfect Christian couple image was carefully manufactured by the exact same marketing machine that invented the name Roy Rogers in the first place. There were also long-running rumors about Roy's financial relationship with Republic Pictures and whether he was fairly compensated for the enormous commercial empire his name and likeness built. It has been noted that Roy Rogers was second only to Walt Disney, in whose name was used in mass merchandise and marketing. Roy Rogers' merchandise covered everything from lunchboxes to cap guns to clothing. Fans allegedly wondered for years whether the man whose face was on all of it actually saw proportionate compensation, or whether the studio took most of it. Cheryl actually talked about these exact questions across multiple interviews over the years, and she was way more direct than the rest of the family ever was in the past. She finally confirmed that her dad's relationship with Republic Pictures was an absolute nightmare. The studio executives had total control over his image, his career, and every single decision he made in his life. The Roy Rogers brand was basically a completely different thing than Roy Rogers, the actual human being. She did not use the exact word exploitation, but the picture she painted was of a guy who was completely trapped inside a corporate machine, while his fans thought he was running the show. What Cheryl revealed about the gap between her father's public image and his private reality was something the Rogers family had protected for nearly 3 decades. And the truth turned out to be far more complicated than anyone expected. The adoption story that changed everything. One of the things Cheryl Rogers Barnett has been most open about over the years is the family's extraordinary history of adoption. Roy and Dale did not just adopt 1 or 2 children and call it a generous act. They built an entire family through adoption, fostering, and radical compassion at a time when none of that was considered normal for anyone, let alone Hollywood's biggest stars. After Robin passed away, and after losing Grace, Roy and Dale went right back to Hope Cottage to adopt another kid. They brought home a Choctaw baby named Mary Little Doe and called her Dodie. Then they adopted Marion. After that, they took in Sandy and Debbie. Over the years, they fostered dozens of other kids, too. The family house in Apple Valley was always a complete circus, totally crowded, noisy, and full of chaotic affection. Cheryl even said it was the most bizarre and amazing childhood a person could ever ask for. But Cheryl also confirmed that the adoption story was not without its darker edges. PR managers and Hollywood reporters reportedly tried to discourage Roy and Dale from having a large family, claiming it would hurt their image as a romantic on-screen couple. The industry saw children as a liability for stars. Roy and Dale defied that completely, and Cheryl said her father never had a single regret about any of it. But he also never forgot the pressure he faced to be something smaller than what he became as a father. The family also hid a massive secret for years regarding Dale Evans herself. Long before she ever met Roy, Dale concealed the fact that she had a son named Tommy. She actually told the public that the boy was her younger brother just to protect her image as a wholesome single woman. Once the wedding happened, the truth finally slipped out and got folded into the official family history. Cheryl confirmed that her dad knew the whole story from the start, and that Dale felt a massive amount of guilt about the lie for a very long time. Roy just accepted the kid into the house without causing a scene, which Cheryl said showed what kind of guy he actually was when the cameras stopped rolling. It is amazing how old Hollywood could look at a mother raising her own child and decide it was a marketing disaster that needed to be covered up by a fake sibling backstory. The real Roy Rogers was not the one who never made mistakes. He was the one who kept choosing his family over everything else, even when Hollywood gave him every reason not to. What his legacy actually means now. Roy Rogers died in 1998. 28 years later, his daughter is still talking about him. That alone says something. Not just because she loved him, which she clearly did, but because the questions fans have about who Roy Rogers really was have never fully gone away. The image was so large and so carefully constructed that people have spent decades trying to find the man underneath it. What Cheryl confirmed across decades of books and interviews is that her dad was just a genuinely decent human being at the core. He was not a flawless saint. He dealt with massive amounts of exhaustion and grief, just like anyone else. But he was good in the ways that actually counted. He chose his kids over his public brand when the studio executives told him it would ruin his box office sales. He stayed completely loyal to Dale, even though Hollywood gave famous men every single excuse to cheat. He had to bury his own children, yet he still found a way to show up for the family members who were left alive. He managed to do all of that while being one of the biggest celebrities on Earth. The Roy Rogers Museum that Cheryl and her brother Dusty ran in Branson, Missouri, eventually closed in 2009 due to financial pressures. Dusty had served as his father's manager, and later president of the Roy Rogers Riders Club, doing everything possible to keep the legacy alive. The museum closing felt to many fans like the end of something irreplaceable. But Cheryl has argued consistently that the legacy lives in the story, not the building. And the story, as she has finally told it fully, is more interesting than the brand ever was. Roy Rogers was just a fictional character manufactured by a movie studio and named by a group of executives and made them rich. What kind of hero did Roy Rogers represent for America? And was his daughter able to reveal the man behind that hero? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.